Welcome to Chat with the Lawyer. I'm your host, Walla Blagay, and today we have a special show. We are honored to have both Delegate Angela Angel from the 25th District and domestic violence expert, Miss Lynn Strange. And we're going to talk about a very important issue, domestic violence, which has been on the minds of many in our community. Many are suffering and feel that there's no hope. And we have two ladies who are in the forefront of this issue and bringing hope and bringing change. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Glad to be
All
here.
right. Thank you. So let me start with you, Delegate Angela Angel. Tell us about your background and how you got to the point where you're pushing legislation towards domestic violence.
Certainly. So as an attorney, I practiced in New York for years in both criminal and family court, doing education and laws and practicing child abuse and neglect. I prosecuted child abuse and neglect. And that was kind of my first introduction into dealing with domestic violence that was occurring in homes where we were investigating child abuse and neglect based on various things such as education. Sometimes a child would come with bruises and it would bring us into a home and we would find out DV was taking place there. Fast forward to Maryland, where I came in 2009 and began working with the O'Malley administration. I then later worked with Prince George's County delegation, and then finally working with Councilmember Derek Leon Davis, where I just began working here on the political and the legislative side of passing laws, looking at education laws, looking at our social service system in the county and in the state. And then I was elected to the Maryland House of Delegates in 2014. And it was very much brought to my attention how we were lacking certain protections for victims of domestic violence. During that time frame, I also was married, and my marriage became volatile and then evolved into where we actually had some incidents of violence. And it was at that point in time where I went to court and was seeking various protections, and I found out kind of some of the lapses that were there. And so when I became elected, it was very much a part of me to fight for, victims who were where I had been and were still suffering under the fact that they could not get protections in our courtroom through our social service system, and really as needed by the entities that are around them, the governmental entities that are supposed to protect them.
Good. Well, definitely an inspiring story. Now, Ms. Strange, I'm going to you. Now, what inspired you to be the expert that you are today?
My plight became against bringing awareness and eradication to domestic violence was from my own suffering during a horrific marital cycle of abuse that entailed sodomy with glass bottles and objects, being stabbed in the back, dragged on the highway while pregnant, raped. Although a lot of times governmental entities or judicial entities don't recognize in a marriage that the spouse can be raped by her husband, busted lips, blackened eyes. And so when I got delivered really out of that marriage, my husband was murdered. That was my way out. The last day he beat me was on January 29th of 1999, and he said by January 31st, you'll be dead. Well, the tides turned. He was dead on the same day that he threatened to kill me. He was murdered in the streets of DC. And from that moment, through the help of God and through the passion within me, I never wanted anyone else to go through what I went through. And so I started a nonprofit in 1999 called Victims of Domestic Violence, or Safety from Domestic Violence, in DC. We lost our grant funding through the DC government, but from that point, it didn't stop me. It propelled me to move forward and join efforts with other nonprofit organizations. I trailblazed right here in District Heights with a lot of government officials to bring awareness against domestic violence, taking the message into the churches, the schools, anywhere that the doors would open, because this issue is serious. And if we abandon it, it's going to be catastrophic. Continuously in our communities, we're seeing it.
Well, wow, what an inspiring story. You ladies have really turned the tide by making sure that no one experienced what you experienced. Now, so let's go into the process, because I feel that there's a lot of holes in the process. People feel there's so much domestic violence in this community, and we're wondering why. So I'm going to actually start with you, Delegate Angel. Why do we have such a rampant issue of domestic violence right in Prince George's County?
Well, I think domestic violence is something that is occurring, of course, all over the state. You do see Prince George's County as a ground zero where we're filing some of the most protective orders, where we're seeing some of the most deadly incidents. And I think part of that is because you kind of have this confluence of a lot of factors that go into it. It's one of the highest costs of living in the area. We don't have adequate childcare that's available. You know, a lot of the issues that we talk about that are typical just safety net issues and that people think, oh, it's just social services. Well, what happens is when families come under that much stress, a lot of times there's a lot of small implosions that are taking place that result in domestic violence. You have a lot of domestic violence cases also deal with alcohol and drug abuse. That's oftentimes present in the homes. A lot of times there's an issue where there's economic issues where there may be unemployment or underemployment. And you typically don't have stable housing. All of those things kind of create this mountain that, you know, once it gets too tall, it's exploded. You know, and unfortunately, you see that here in our area. When we're talking about affordable housing, when we are talking about access to adequate childcare, all of those things feed into not just the stability of families, but it feeds into our domestic violence problems that we're having here. You know, it's one of those things where we really have to start looking at holistically at what we are providing as a government, as nonprofits,
yes,
as social service agencies, as churches. Because for families to not have these type of incidents happening, you need to get ongoing therapy. You know, you need to make sure that they're stabilized. You know, do they have enough food? Do they have enough, you know, income? Do they have a place to live? Not that excuses the behavior,
exactly,
but what we have to recognize is it contributes. And I'm sure you found that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also the barrier is that the perception of domestic violence for the victim. I think a lot of times it's a very judgmental type of cycle. So a lot of individuals believe that the victim has a choice. Yes, we always, as an individual, have a choice, but there are barriers in those choices, as the Delegate Angel has expressed. Economic. I may be removed from the home by police that night to get me to a shelter, but post the shelter, sustaining me while I have 2 or 3 kids that no one readily, maybe family might not be willing to take me in. And I think even in the judicial sense, understanding, take away the judgment that she has a choice and look deeper as to why is she staying? What is going on psychologically? What is going on emotionally? What is that connection? For me, it was almost, I've never been addicted to drugs, but it was the fear that paralyzed me, that I believed that when he said he was gonna kill me, he would kill me. On top of having 3 children, lack of family support, and you're stupid, you're dumb, why are you staying, why are you going back? Understanding the cycle of domestic violence, that the very people you pull out may go back, but that should not exclude you or preclude you from helping them when they come again. And so I think a lot of times there's a lot of judgment and re-victimization to victims because there's a lack of understanding of the cycle of domestic violence and what the true services, long-term services are needed for victims. Not just here, but globally with the issue of domestic violence.
Absolutely.
So let's go into, because it should be probably the last question, but it's the first question in my mind. What is missing in our system that's not helping those who are experiencing domestic violence? Because this is an ongoing problem that we have not come with a solution that would eradicate it. So what's missing? Let me start with you, Delegate Angel.
You know, there's so many things that I think contribute to it. You know, like Lynn, yeah. Like Lynn has said, there's the stigma that goes into it. There's the fact that to get people out of these situations, it's long term. And it's really taking a look at someone and saying, it's not, you know, can I sleep on your couch for a week? It's not, can I sleep on your couch for a month? It's the fact that you might have someone with multiple children who need a place to live long term because they may not have a job, they may not be able to get the support, and there's a lot of economic factors that go into it. Do you know when you go to file a protective order, there's actually a provision where a judge can order what's called emergency child support. That is almost never done. And so these women have no support. Oftentimes you'll have, or men, you'll have the person who has the financial means threatening the victim, you know, you need to come back home, I'm not paying for this, I'm not paying for your car, everything will be gone. You know, you have to think about that. You will have to rebuild a family. And that's very difficult even for our social service systems to get their hands around. We don't have housing, you know, available for those who aren't going through domestic violence. And when you pile on those who are, and the services that they will need, it's very difficult, and that's just one aspect of it. There's also a mental health component.
Absolutely.
For both the abuser and the victim, for the children that have been exposed to it, and who's going to pay for those services. It's multiple issues that, it's one of those problems that unfortunately has so many other areas that you're dealing with. Usually those kids are having issues in school. You've got to figure out how do we help them there. You've got to figure out how do we get a family housing. If someone is going to leave, who leaves? Does the batterer leave? Does the victim leave? Who owns the house? Or who's paying the rent? All of those things go into how do we begin to eradicate, as you say the problem. And it's multiple. There are lots of layers to it. And I think a lot of times what happens is we like to do a patchwork fix and we walk away. And then they end caught up right back in the cycle, even if it's not with that same person. But if you don't get the victim to understand some of the issues that they're having, they'll end up right back in another situation because that's what they know.
What about you, Ms. Strange?
Is there really a safe haven? When we categorize the word safe haven, are we, from a governmental standpoint, social service standpoint, nonprofit standpoint, really providing a safe haven? If I walk into the court system and I'm seeking a protective order, and I'm being badgered with the questions of why did you stay, and oh, you're back here again, and I have to prove, even though I have black eyes, bruises, that this really exists, it's almost putting me on trial to say, hey, I've been abused, and I'm standing there blatantly letting you see the physical wounds, the physical wounds, and I'm being turned away. Or if I did go through the commissioner's office and file the criminal assault charge, but I get to court and I realize that it's null pros, or there's minimal penalty, then why should I? Because when I walk out that courtroom with the same person that perpetrated against me, I'm at a higher risk of lethality and re-victimization of physical harm than I was from the moment I walked in.
Well, that's good, and we're going to take a short break, but when I come back, I want you to go more into that because you have seen this from from a nonprofit process and from the governmental process. So we want to go into that, and as you can see from watching this, from watching these two ladies discuss this issue, this is really important. So we're going to take a short break, but we'd like you to stay tuned. Thank you.
My son had a drinking problem at college. I'm glad a friend suggested Al-Anon family groups. Is someone's drinking troubling you? You might be surprised at what you can learn in an Al-Anon family group from people just like you. Call 1-888-4-AL-ANON or go to alanon.org.
Welcome back to Chat with the Lawyer, and as you know, we're discussing domestic violence. We have Delegate Angela Angel from the District 25 and domestic violence expert, Ms. Lynn Strange. And we're going to go back to you, Ms. Strange, and you're going to talk about sort of what's missing here. And you were talking about the process. So I want you to go into detail over what you've seen both in a nonprofit sense and also in a governmental sense.
In the governmental sense, just imagine I have been battered and bruised maybe an hour before 24 hours. And I'm seeking what every nonprofit agency is telling me out there, go to the courts and seek out a protective order or peace order. And I get there, and as I'm standing before a judge as a victim, victimized, emotionally, wounded physically, and having to prove that I've been abused, and then hearing that no, that is an easy way for a victim to say, I'm not coming back through these doors. I think from the bench state, from the judicial entities, coupled with law enforcement, and in a negative way I say this, there's got to be a greater impact of awareness to those individuals because those are the places that the victims are going to. And so why would I navigate the very system that re-victimizes me in a sense and makes me feel like a victim all over with the shame, the embarrassment. Now imagine, I'm not standing just in my living room, I'm in a courtroom full of other citizens, other women, other men. I'm standing even with the batterer at times, at the hearings. And if I'm being talked to as if I'm less than nothing, that propels his action. If I file a second-degree assault, destruction of property, telephone harassment, and I walk in and I'm told that there's not enough sufficient evidence. Okay, we understand that there are cases, yes, the prosecutor has to have the evidence to be able to prove the case. But there are times if that victim feels like that she gave what she thought that she had was sufficient in terms of photos or things of that nature, and it comes back later that that case is thrown out or that person's found out guilty. We get that from a judicial sense, but where is the trust for the victim to be able to go back and re-navigate that system again? So there are barriers there. And the other barrier is I'm in the same courtroom with the perpetrator. That's very hard for victims at times. I think that if we could get into a place where we could do teleconference in the hearing, sort of like they do when individuals are incarcerated. Those individuals a lot of times are having teleconference from the jail. They're not walking in to the jail in a lineup. They're having their hearings by audio. I think for victims, we give them that safe haven, that safe place, but leave out the victimization, leave out the shame. That's already there. That embarrassment's already there. And then the fear that takes place when they're walking side by side. We have had incidents where victims have been battered in the parking lot leaving the courthouse, battered leaving the commissioner's office, leaving the same place that they were facing.
On the property?
On the property. And when victims leave those domestic violence relationships or they seek to pursue criminal charges against the batterer, we are placing them at a higher risk for lethality, for re-victimization, for assault. Those are very risky entities that the victims are navigating. So we as a society, we as a judicial body, we as a governmental body have to open up and not close our eyes to see what the risk factors are, what the needs are, and somehow let's get rid of all the bureaucracy that has taken place and let's get the laws in place, stiff laws. Still, not 90 days. You know, you have individuals that are able to create assault to a victim 2 or 3 times. You may have 90 days, 6 months, maybe a year, 18 months. That's not good enough. Let's make the law stiffer. So I'm hoping that judicially and lawmakers look at this issue in Prince George's County, because we are seeing the high level and the high prevalence, and take it to Annapolis on a way that brings impact and understanding.
Now, let me ask you, because, and I'm going to turn to you soon, Delegate Angel, but somebody that's experiencing domestic violence needs to get out of their home. What is their options? When they come to somebody like you, they need to get out. The person is abusing them, they need to get out. Where do they go?
Honestly, we have to assess the resources that we have. And so first, safety, yes. We want them out of their home to eliminate the lethality, the murder. But most likely we're taking them to a shelter. Here in Prince George's County, a lot of times even the shelter, like the Family Crisis Center, not even specific to that, you have Shepherd Cove. You cannot bring a male child in with female children. So then you have a mother who has maybe a male son and 2 female children, may not be able to get a bed in that particular shelter. So our only hopes are that there's some place, which really is limited here in Prince George's County. I know at one time, I think the Department of Social Service have maybe hotel stays or hotel vouchers, but like Delegate Angel said, there's no long-term sustaining of these individuals. So there are barriers there even for domestic violence advocates, social service agencies, nonprofit agencies, to really assist these victims in a way that would keep them out of that lethality. And that's what's most important. Children are dying in these homes and they're witnessing the domestic violence as well. I mean, thank God for Angela Alston-Brooks, the state's attorney, who did get a law passed about victimization of children witnessing domestic violence in the home, and that law being passed and holding the offender accountable to the law for that. But in the meantime, that is the barrier. That is one of the main barriers. What do we do?
So there's no short-term solutions for everyone and no long-term solutions for anyone. So Delegate Angel, how do we address that? We know that you've tried to push some legislation in the last few sessions. So tell us about that.
I mean, so there's 2 different aspects. There's, of course, the pushing legislation and trying to get certain legal remedies available. But then part of what you're talking about are social services being available. That's budget, and that's also policies. Like some of the things that, and you know, it's funny, I constantly, the movie Doctor Strange, I constantly want to say Doctor Strange. But some of the things that Lynn has talked about, I was actually surprised when I moved here from New York. We had a separate, a system where I come from, where if there is a victim and a perpetrator, or an alleged perpetrator, they come in separately, they leave separately, they have an escort out. We have a holding area. You actually have to ask for that here. That's policy. That is a policy between the courts, between the different entities that are involved in that process. They can create that. And I believe they have taken some steps to do that. And of course it's available if you ask, but it's almost something we shouldn't be having victims have to ask, can I get an escort? It should be, it should be given. You leave first. There's an automatic holding area, and that's something that doesn't take legislation.
And let me ask you, just I don't want to interrupt you, have you known any cases where someone's asked for it and not received it?
I don't know personally. I know I've sat in courtrooms and I've asked for it for someone. I remember sitting in 2 courtrooms where I had seen some interactions outside. And when they went into the courtroom, I myself alerted the sheriff's office, you know, that gentleman was very tense with that young lady right there, and you all need to keep them separated. And she didn't ask for it. She may have never known I was the one, but having seen this and knowing some of the signs, I was like, you know, I stepped in and asked them to do that. You know, when we talk about social services and someone wanting to leave a household, you know, leave a home where violence is taking place, you know, the only place you have is Family Crisis Center. There they will take a mixed family. You know, most other places, you know, a mother has to decide, especially, how do you make a woman choose between leaving her baby with her abuser because it's a boy? You know, like how do we sit here and know that is her option? Because what do you think they're going to choose? They're going to choose to protect their child. That's innate. And so, you know, we really have to look at budgeting. We have to look at our social service, you know, how we're doing our social services that are available, and really begin to reprogram and allocate funding for those types of things. You know, when we go back to legislation, and just to be clear, the legislation that you spoke about is actually a penalty enhancement. So it is only after you have proven that there and gotten a finding that, say, an abuse happened or a rape happened, then you can bring in the penalty phase, you know, that by the way, he broke her nose in front of her child. Because we were actually not able to get it done as an entirely separate crime. That was actually a law that I offered again this year, in making it domestic violence that takes place in front of a child a separate crime. It was actually completely kind of, you know, I was let know that was not going to happen. So what we changed it to was to get it classified very clearly as neglect. So we offered House Bill 802, which would offer if something happened in front of a child and it's classified as neglect, what that does is then when the sheriff's officer comes, when the doctor knows about it, because when the teacher knows that domestic violence is taking place in a home, they can now call social services and at least get them involved in that home to try and get services for them, to try and get family preservation funds, which might allow then for mom to get those type of fundings to move. Currently, that bill is kind of just sitting stagnant. You know, and it was I was told that language was going to be put on another bill, then that bill went through and the language didn't go, and so now we're still kind of fighting and asking for the language to get out. And I don't know if you've heard, I'm glad to share it with you, Mandrell Burks has this phone call of this child calling 911 and reporting real time him seeing his mother be beaten and possibly killed in front of him. If you can't listen to that and know that we need to step in and step up, you need to step down.
Absolutely.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. So when we talk about the Family Crisis Center, let's talk about the resources we do have while we're fighting the laws that should be in place. Is there enough space for all of the, like if the Family Crisis Center can't help you, I mean, do we need to look at more funding? How do we address that?
Absolutely, because if the Family Crisis Center can't help you, sometimes you might be able to get a voucher if social services has that in the budget. But if they don't, which a lot of times I have referred people and they've been told they don't have it, there's absolutely nothing that can be done. Those women are basically told, see if you can get someplace safe. See if you can get to a friend or family's house. Because there's nothing, it's just the money's not there. And so expanding Family Crisis Center, we've actually, when I worked for Derek Leon Davis, we've been in talks with a couple of different nonprofits and national entities where we've tried to look at even repurposing some of these houses that are going into foreclosure or that may need, and saying, can we get someone to come in, repurpose these for victims, for them to be able to rebuild their lives. You know, and so those are some of the things that we can do, even as private citizens. Absolutely. You know, I know there have been a few churches, and you know, and I'm a member of First Baptist of Glenarden.
Right.
So So I do know that there have been at least a couple of times where we've been able to notify one of their ministries and they've been able to help a family. But that's, a drop in a huge bucket. And so we really need to begin looking, and we also need to begin looking as a community. We need to begin, looking and assessing ourselves. What can we do? How can we, take this house in our neighborhood and rebuild it and repurpose it and pour into it and give maybe monies to a nonprofit that will allow it to be a sanctuary home for victims. But when you start talking to people, you'll get somebody at a rally saying, yes, and be like, what about that home in your neighborhood? Get real quiet.
It's true. We don't want that in our neighborhood.
It's real quiet. But that's what it's going to take, honestly.
Well, so then another issue that we can discuss is how can everyone sort of step in? First of all, I wanted to go into if someone has a job and they know their spouse knows or their abuser knows where they work, all of these things. Now, if you go to Department of Social Services or any of these nonprofits, do they help you sort of find a job, go somewhere else where your abuser can't get access to you? Is that possible?
So there's two things that can happen. One of the things is that you can get a protective order, God willing.
Right. Exactly.
God willing, the creek doesn't rise.
Right.
If you are able to get a protective order that will ban them from your place of work. And so then, and then when that happens, but that becomes very embarrassing even to tell your boss and have to divulge to your boss. I remember when I was going through my situation, I worked for the county and I worked for electeds and it was public buildings. And I had to alert, a lot of people about this very personal situation because it's an open building. And I had to have increased, people patrolling people. It was very embarrassing, but at that point in time, I had reached a point where I was very fearful, and it didn't, I was able to put that aside. I was also more comfortable and in a safe position where I didn't have to worry about being fired. A lot of women don't necessarily have that. Some bosses, it's a small company, could say, I don't want that drama here. Look, you're gonna have to go. In that particular case, we do have laws that protect them. They can receive unemployment. But that may not be this, just like any other. It may not be the same as you were making, and it still is going to create what we call certain financial. There's one form of what we call financial abuse that happens where an abuser, when they can't maybe get you physically, do certain things to affect you being able to live. At one point in time, I remember my ex telling me, "Well, if I can't force you out, I'll starve you out." And at that point, he withdrew every single monetary assistance he had ever given to me as I was pregnant with 4 children under the age of 3.
Well, I want to thank you all for a great show today. You guys have provided a lot of information. It's clear, ladies, we have work to do. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I just want to start with you, Delegate Angel. How would they get in touch with you?
Sure, you can call my delegate's office, which is 301-858-3707. But one of the easiest ways you can find me online, just go to advocateangel.com, www.advocateangel.com, and there you can reach me, through various medias.
Okay. And how about you?
It's 2 ways. One through Keita Williams with the Raw Beauty organization, Attica Foundation, and I'm also on social media sites, Twitter, Facebook.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, and just a note that Chat with the Lawyer is under Attica Foundation. Thank you for watching our show. If you want to get more information about the shows or this show or get in contact with anyone that's come on this show, you can go to www.chatwiththelawyer.tv. We have all of the information there, including if you do need a lawyer, you can go to that website and look at the lawyers we have had on the show in the past. Well, we thank you for watching us, and we hope that you will watch more of our shows. Thank you.